Do you know the difference between the pro-life movement and the abortion abolitionist movement? Hey guys, I'm Keith Foskey, and on today's show, we're going to be talking to Ben Zeisloft. Ben is the author of a new book entitled Forsakers of the Fatherless. In the book, he addresses many of what he considers to be the failures of the pro-life movement, and he traces out the history of the abortion abolitionist movement. So if you've had a question about what each side believes or stands for, we're going to answer that in today's show. So stay tuned. Your Calvinist Podcast begins right now.
Sometimes I feel the weight of the world fall down on me so heavy, and I need a friendly voice with some good theology. Calvinistically speaking, so I mix a manly drink, Pepsi and shoe polish, and I hit the YouTube link. Don't say hit, that sounds violent. And I feel my troubles all melt away. It's your Calvinist Podcast with Keith Foskey. Beards and bow ties, laughs till sunrise. It's your Calvinist Podcast with Keith Foskey. He's not like most Calvinists, he's nice.
And welcome back to Your Calvinist Podcast. My name is Keith Foskey, and I am your Calvinist. We're going to be bringing our guest, Ben Zeisloft, in just a moment. But before I do, I just want to remind you that this podcast is a ministry of Sovereign Grace Family Church. So if you're in the Jacksonville, Florida area, we would love to have you come and visit with us in a future Lord's Day service. And if you want to learn more about us, you can go to sgfcjax.org. Also, don't want to forget to mention our important podcast partners, including our longest running partners, tinybibles.com. This is the smallest printed Bible that you can get on the market. It comes in King James, New King James, and now in the New American Standard Bible. And if you use my name Keith in the coupon codes, go to tinybibles.com, use my name Keith, you will get a percentage off. Also, if you're interested in theology and learning more about doctrine, I have the book, What Do We Believe? From Striving for Eternity Ministries. You can also get that book and get a discount on it by using my name Keith in the coupon code. All of this information, along with some of the commercials we're going to have later in the show, have the information in the description down below. So if you're interested in going and checking out our podcast partners, you can learn all about them there. And I want to mention one new one. You can see on the back of my laptop here, I have a new decorations on my laptop, Superior Theology sticker, Make Bible Study Great Again sticker. My meme, which is, I hope it was a blast for them because it was certainly a blast for me, is now a sticker. And these stickers have been made available to us from a company called Spiraling Impressions, and you can go to spiralingimpressions.com, and the coupon code there is a little different. It's Your Calvinist, but if you use the Your Calvinist coupon code, you will get a discount off, so go check them out. All right, guys, we have a really important conversation about the difference between abolitionism and pro-life, so let's move over to our guest and get it started. I am welcoming today our guest, Ben Zeisloft, and Ben is not only a new friend of mine, but he is also the editor of my book, which I'm very thankful to say, Ben, thank you for doing the work of editing my terrible writing. I appreciate that. But you're also the author of a new book that is coming out, the book Forsakers of the Fatherless. And so I want to thank you for being here with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to edit your book, and it was not bad at all. It was very helpful, practical, certainly useful to a broad array of audiences, both the pastor, the layman, who wants to understand how a biblically functioning church functions. It was a privilege to edit. It really wasn't that bad. Don't worry about that.
Well, I appreciate it. I've always said I'm a better speaker than a writer, so I'm thankful to hear at least some words of building up on that. So I appreciate it. But again, we're here today to talk about your upcoming book. And if you could, for just a moment, tell us when the book is coming out and tell us a little bit about yourself as you're telling us this, because I know some of my audience may not know who you are.
Absolutely. So the book is called Forsakers of the Fatherless, The Secret Treachery of the Pro-Life Establishment. It comes out in August. It's available for pre-order from Founders Ministries right now. Folks can use the term Foskey for 10% off since I'm on your show today.
Awesome.
They're doing some generous volume discounts. And then for churches, if churches want to buy multiple copies, they can reach out to founders directly and they can help with that a lot. But that's the timeline for the book. It started pre-order last month. It'll be out officially in August. But the book really tries to tackle what exactly the state of play is right now with abortion in post-Roe America. And sadly, the state of play is that in a lot of states, especially deep red states, I believe you're in Florida, places like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, those states, the primary obstacle to truly ending abortion, truly abolishing abortion, is often the main pro-life establishment groups in those states. So it's a shocking revelation, but it's something that people need to know about, which is why I wrote the book. Presented 8 different chapters, 8 different states, showing multiple examples of that happening, of bills that just say, let's provide equal protection to preborn babies, apply the same laws that protect born people like you and me to them, make sure that they're treated like the full image bearers of God, human beings they are. And there are pro-life establishment Republican groups that are opposing that because they think it goes too far. We can get into the reasons for that. But that's basically the book. And then just a brief introduction of myself. I'm the communications director for the Foundation to Abolish Abortion. So we like to say that we make the case for abolition. We help all these state level groups write legislation, produce materials, research, analyses, showing why equal protection is the way forward, abolishing abortion is the way forward. Before this, I was the editor of the Sentinel, the Republic Sentinel, which is a conservative news and commentary outlet owned and operated by Christians. Still do a lot of work with them with writing and editing, so folks can find my byline there. And then before that, I was at the Daily Wire. So a few years now in the conservative Christian media journalism landscape, now transitioning to a new role and more of a policy position.
Wow. So you're a busy guy, sounds like.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to ask you, I'm going to ask you some sort of get to know you questions before we get into the book, because these are just questions that I have. And I know when people have, when I have guests on the show, just some things that sort of set a baseline for where you may be coming from. And having read the book, and by the way, thank you for giving me the opportunity to pre-read the book before we had this interview. I feel like I know you a little bit more from the book, but the book isn't about you. It's not even really about your experience. It's about a lot of different people's experiences and different states. As you said, each chapter is a different state. And you talk about people I expected to hear about, like Jeff Durbin and others, and people I had never heard of, at least not in my circles, had not heard of, but very important people in the fight for abolition and the fight for life. So again, very grateful for having had the opportunity to read it. But as far as you're concerned, you're not just doing this because you're a moralist. You're doing this because you're a Christian, right?
Absolutely.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about your Christian faith and when you became a Christian? And when I say what kind of Christian you are, you know what I mean. I don't mean that we're like different breeds, but we certainly come from different backgrounds. So what's your background in your faith?
Well, if I had to pick a certain number of your categories from the denominational videos you do, I would say somewhere between Baptist and Presbyterian. So I grew up Baptist. I told my wife I was going to be on this show. She's like, who is that? I'm like, oh, he does the denominational videos. She's like, oh yeah, that guy.
And you know what's funny is that's how people identify themselves with me a lot. They're like, I'm your Big Eva, or I'm your Methodist.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So people, it's become its own little zeitgeist. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I'm a superior theology PCA guy these days. So still working through the exact issue on infant baptism. We don't have children yet, so haven't had to really study it that closely, but I'll back up a little bit. Grew up evangelical, mega church, non-denominational. My parents were both believers. And then when I got to college is when I really started taking my faith seriously. I met older friends who really knew the Bible, students a few years older than me. And, if asked like a specific question about the Bible or doctrine, they would be able to answer it really well. So I think I was converted when I was a freshman in college. I think there were signs of definitely God working in me. I could have been converted when I was younger, but I would definitely say I started seriously following the Lord Jesus when I was in college. And those same friends were involved in abortion mill ministry. And by the way, that's how I started attending my current church too. They were all going to the same PCA church, and I stayed in the Philadelphia area, and we're still members there. But started getting involved in the fight against abortion too, because a lot of those same students would go down to the abortion mills in Philadelphia. We have a couple of really large ones. We have the busiest one in the state, which murders 6,500 babies per year. We have another one that does 3,500. So started getting involved in abortion mill ministry. Still down there most Saturdays with some other guys from the area. So it helps to keep the issue personal. Seeing babies murdered changes you. Holding a baby that was supposed to be murdered, but God intervened and saved that child's life changes you a lot. So that's a big part of what set me on my trajectory. It's not theoretical for me. It can't be anymore because I've seen it happen. I've seen what it's like to try to save a baby from death. And so that's a big reason why I wrote the book too, is it's an issue personal to me. Yeah,
absolutely. And I've preached outside of abortion mills. So I know the experience that can have on you. And like you said, they're just almost overwhelming at times, thinking about what's going on in that building and what you're trying to intervene on behalf of. And when you're out there, I do have a question. Do you find yourself somewhat being distinguished from are there other groups out there doing it too, and you're dividing from them, or are you partnering with them? And because I found when, like, at times in past, like if I went to an abortion clinic to preach, there would be Catholics there, or there would be people of different, like maybe who would say, don't preach the gospel and things like that. How do you find yourself interacting with folks like that, or have you had to interact with that?
Yeah, for sure. So the main one that I go to is the one that does $3,500 per year. So it's a Planned Parenthood in Center City, Philadelphia. So it's unique with a lot of other abortion mills across the country where it's really close quarters. So they walk literally right past you to get into the front gates for that abortion mill. So we don't actually usually preach. We share the gospel constantly, and we give out gospel tracts, that sort of thing. But you just don't really even need a microphone to preach because it's so close quarters. So we do have Roman Catholic friends who are down there, and they're a little more passive. They'll pray the rosary. They'll hold a sign. A couple of them will talk to women. I'm good friends with them at this point. I mean, we definitely have, we've had a lot of debates on the sidewalk about theology and approaches and things like that. We don't always see eye to eye, but I think we have good relations with them. I know that's not always the case across the country, so we're blessed in that case, but yeah, for sure. We have a more conversational approach just because we can, not because, preaching is bad or anything like that. So that, I think, is part of the reason why we have such good relations with them.
Well, good. Right now, I am teaching a class on biblical law and ethics. And it just so happened that I was teaching this class when you and I began to have our conversation, and you sent me the copy of your book. And I'm co-teaching this with one of my elders, and he happened to have the class on life ethics, which we put under life ethics, of course, abortion, euthanasia, suicide, things like that. All the very difficult topics I let him talk about. Right? No. I mean, I would have been glad to have taught, but it would just happen to be his turn. But in that conversation, in that class, rather, he was making the point that there is a distinction between the pro-life movement and the abolitionist movement. And he didn't go too deeply into the divide. When I had taught a couple weeks before in preparation for his class, I mentioned one of the divides is how we recognize the legality of the mother's involvement. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but also the difference in exceptions to abortion, things like that. And it just so happened, like I said, I'm teaching this class, and your book, I read it and I'm like, this is all the stuff I didn't get around to teaching. So I want to, so right away, as a shout out to anyone who's taken my class, and I know many people who watch my show do take our classes. We make them available online. I want to say Ben's book is a great addition to the class we're doing, because he has dug in and has given us a resource here to really highlight the differences between what might be called the classic pro-life position and what is a more what we might call the modern abolitionist movement. And I call it modern because even in your book, you point out to the fact that what's happening in the abolition movement is relatively recent. And I don't mean that recent in the sense of bad, but I mean, didn't you say the man who sort of coined the term, and I forget his name, but you said it in the book.
Yeah, Russell Hunter. Yeah.
Yeah. Wasn't it 2016 or something that term first started being used? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, that's about right. So I had the Oklahoma chapter as the first chapter in my book because Russell Hunter was one of the main movers and shakers there. So he was studying he was getting a doctorate in the history of science, and he was studying Darwin and some basically 19th century topics, which led him into studying the slavery abolition movement. So there was actually a lot of the same issues at hand with slavery abolition, where there's sort of the anti-slavery gradualists versus the immediatists. Let's just abolish slavery. It's an unjust practice. We need to get rid of it. So at the same time, he was basically having to do a pro-life debates at his church, where he defended the pro-life position. And he realized that a lot of the modern pro-life groups are a lot like the anti-slavery gradualists, who are doing things like, limiting the number of slaves you could pack onto a slave ship. Instead of 400, just do 300. Or, let's add some free states, some slave states to the Union. So he actually came to the conclusion of, actually, we're off base here. We need a reform movement here in America in terms of how we oppose abortion. It needs to be built on God's word. That's another huge difference is, but on what basis, by what standard? I'm sure you talk about that in the ethics class of, why can we say that something is evil? It's because God says it's evil. And there's actually prescriptions in scripture on how to fight a public or national evil. And we haven't been doing that quite in the same way with abortion. Now, he was not the first person to realize some of these things. I think there are abolitionist sentiments of various kinds ever since Roe, of realizing that, yes, because because Christians in this country have realized to varying degrees of conviction, we need to end abortion, and we need to do it because God is our King, Christ is our Lord. But I think you've really seen that start to percolate in the past decade or 15 years, and there's really good fruit coming from it. Yeah.
And so there was and I didn't tell you we were going to talk about this, so I'm fine if we don't go too far into it. There was a video that came out a while back where very famous pastor, I won't mention his name, but he basically sort of described abolitionists as almost like Johnny come latelys. And that wasn't the term that he used. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. I'm not even sure if you're familiar with the interview I'm talking about. So, but it was basically the idea, like, well, the pro-life movement's been fighting this battle for 50 years or 60 years. And these guys come along in the last 10 years and they're telling us we're doing it all wrong. What right do they have? And again, I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. But that's the way it really came across. And I know a lot of abolitionists took great issue with that. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? And
I think I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to call him out or anything like that. It's just, but what do you think about that argument that this abolitionist movement is really, who are you guys to tell the guys who've been doing it for 50 years that they're doing it wrong? And I'm not asking that question. I'm asking this on behalf of others. I think I know the answer, but I'm thinking of how someone else might ask that question.
Yeah, for sure. It goes back to the question of by what standard. I mean, for 40 or 50 years, we've had the same status on child sacrifice in America where it hasn't really been going away. So I would make the case that incremental, kind of mealy mouth, soft strategy of, kind of grab the wins we can and then go with those has been a proven failure, right? So the mentality of let's just kind of beat around the bush and do what little things we can here and there with this kind of doomer mindset of saying we can never really end abortion in America, or we need to wait for this national revival, has been a proven failure. So after a decade, after half a century of child sacrifice, just every single year, 1 million babies, 800,000 babies, 1.2 million babies, it's been fluctuating between those kind of numbers. I would say we need to reform our approach. It's clearly not working. The culture is getting worse instead of better. Babies are still being murdered. I'd also as well, a lot of those pro-life leaders from the past have come around to abolitionism. Guys like Rusty Thomas, who was involved in the rescue movement. So he was so intense that he would go, before the FACE Act was a thing, you could get thrown in federal prison for it. He would go and blockade abortion mills, peacefully block abortion mills so they couldn't murder babies. He completely reformed his organization and said, we need to pivot here. We need to course correct, repent. Where we haven't been in alignment with God's law, we've been too soft on this issue. So I think, if you talk to really anybody who's seriously battling abortion these days, even if they don't use the term abolitionists, they're definitely seeing the issues. They're seeing why equal protection is important, why the second victim narrative, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, is a proven lie. So it's definitely moving in this trajectory for a very good reason. Is because the past one hasn't worked.
Gotcha. And you just mentioned the second victim theory and the idea of that being an issue. And I honestly, from someone who is not as involved in the arguments as you are. I mean, obviously, I very much believe in the abolition of abortion. Very much believe that it should stop yesterday, right? Like it should be over. And very convicted about that, and preached it and taught it and preached outside of abortion clinics. But from somebody from the outside, when I look in at the inner workings of the arguments, it seems to me that the one of the main arguments is that the pro-life movement wants to identify the woman herself as a victim, and the abolitionist movement wants to identify the woman as responsible for procuring the murder of her child. And when I was teaching again in this ethics class, I said, when I just mentioned it, I said, I think the biggest issue that the pro-life establishment has about adopting the abolitionist position is this issue of how do we see the woman? Am I right or wrong in saying that?
Yeah, that's correct. That's definitely one of the big issues, and it's one of the main reasons why we hear our bills shouldn't pass or can't pass, is these big pro-life groups insisting that the woman is the victim. And I would say that this is not actually a point that abolitionists have originated with. We didn't come to the table saying we need to criminalize abortion for women, and like that was the main point. We started by saying, abortion needs to be criminalized for anybody who willfully murders a baby, right? So just like today, if you murder a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, it doesn't matter what color you are, what sex you are, whether you're the child's father or mother or a third party. If you murder somebody, you get penalized for it. You go to jail for a very long time. You get executed even in some states. But we're just saying the same standards that happen there should apply to the baby in the womb because they're just as human, right? So a baby who's 6 months gestation, 3 months gestation should have the same legal protections as a human being, as an image bearer of God, as somebody who just happens to be a little bit bigger and then more developed and then outside the womb. But the response we have to that argument is, well, what about the woman? Isn't the woman a victim? And I would say women can be victims of abortion. I've seen that a couple of times in our ministry up in Philadelphia at the abortion mills. There's one example of a woman being basically dragged out of a white van by a guy who didn't look to be her husband or boyfriend or anything, and just kind of whisked into the abortion mill. I don't think she should be penalized, but I think the other women who we routinely see who walk into the abortion mill giving us the middle finger or cursing or laughing or making jokes about how this is my 7th abortion. I just want to get back to partying. I just want to to use more polite words, to have more intercourse and get back to it. We see those women too. We see a lot of them. So we already have a legal system in the United States where judges, juries, prosecutors can sort through who is an actual victim and who is a perpetrator of a grave crime against a child. So we're just saying apply those same standards that already exist to preborn children, stop dehumanizing preborn children, remove exceptions from the law that actually say that women can't be charged for murdering their children. A lot of states, including a lot of red states that we discussed, have those laws explicitly on the books. So even if a woman willfully murders her 8.5-month-old child in the womb, she cannot be penalized for it because it's in the law that she can't be. So we're saying that's an insane double standard, just treat them like human beings, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, and that was interesting reading in the book that the law not only doesn't penalize the woman, but makes it against the rules to penalize her. Is that what you're saying? So it's not even an option that she be penalized. Yeah,
and so the Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is part of Susan B. Anthony, if you don't believe me, you can go look at this. They have an entire webpage boasting about this. They say, I think it's called something like pro-life laws, always protect the second victim or something of that nature. And they have an entire updated list of 20 plus states where they have their language encoded into the law saying that a woman upon whom an abortion is induced or performed cannot be penalized under this section. Students for Life, a very prominent grassroots pro-life group, every single piece of legislation they had, every model legislation they had this year has explicit language saying any woman who willfully has an abortion cannot be prosecuted for that abortion, which we would say, well, there are some women who are forced into it, of course, just like any other crime, but the vast majority, the plurality, are willfully murdering their preborn children, and they should be held accountable under the law just like anybody else.
Yeah. And that would seem reasonable. And this is where I think people would at least ostensibly agree. I read an article last week about a woman who had murdered her newborn baby.
Right.
And her newborn baby had died at her hand. I don't remember how, but it was awful. And everyone was crying out for her justice, that she had done this thing. She had killed her baby. And yet when the baby's in the womb, there's a different standard. The standard changes for the minds of many people. If the baby's in the womb, it's no longer, she's no longer responsible. And that's where I think the people come in. And again, I've seen exactly what you mentioned. I have seen women who have, under duress, been forced into abortions. And I've never witnessed it with my own eyes, but I've heard stories of people who have told me that their mother or father, drove them there, demanded that they go in there, said that they would disown them, and essentially forced upon them this terrible action, and they never wanted to do it, begged for it, cried for it, don't make me kill my baby, those types of things. We know that happens. There's no doubt that those are realities. But I've also seen the woman on the meme who's wearing the shirt that says, I've had 27 abortions, or some ridiculous number. And you say, well, okay, after your 25th, I think it's not I think a pattern is forming here.
Right.
So, but this is, every time this comes up, every time this conversation comes up, inevitably someone will say, well, the woman is a victim too. And the woman is a victim. And you mentioned this in the book, a victim of a system that makes her feel like this is right. What would you say to that? If somebody said, well, it's not that she was forced to do it by the hand of her father or husband or boyfriend, but she was forced to do it by a system that makes her think this is her only way out.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's a foolish argument for a number of reasons. I mean, we live in a fallen world, and we live in a country that's apostatizing. So we're going to have a lot of those sort of pressures against us. So the first thought in my mind was, the young man who's watching pornography. He lives in a pornified culture. He lives in, billboards, advertisements, everything is just sex. Most the age is getting younger and younger for first exposure to porn. And yet we would say, a young man who's willfully opening his laptop at night and watching things he shouldn't watch is not a victim of pornography. He's not a second victim of pornography. It goes all the way back to the garden where, Eve was deceived by the serpent, and yet Eve was held accountable for her actions, So she wasn't just this blank slate in a neutral world. That doesn't really exist. We have moral choices, good and evil, and sometimes the world takes a side on that for evil and forces it against us. But it doesn't nullify our choice or our responsibility for our own actions. We're beings made in God's image who have the capacity to discern between good and evil. And we're going to be held accountable on the last day, and we'll all stand before God as individuals. We're not going to be able to say, society told me to murder my baby. And I'd also point to, places like Chicago, the inner city, where there's a lot of gang killings and violence. We would never say, a lot of those people who are killing each other in the inner cities don't have fathers in the home. They don't have good environments. They don't have stable families. But we would not say, absolve them of murder charges, actually write into the law that, an 18-year-old who murders somebody in a gang shooting can't be held accountable just because he has those bad cultural influences. That's way more potent than, just a general pro-abortion culture that a woman's brought up in. So none of those arguments really hold water, and it really overlooks the fact that laws are tutors too. So a good law that says, a baby in the womb should be equally protected as babies outside the womb would actually disciple everybody, including women, away from seeing abortion as a valid option.
The divide between the pro-life movement and the abolitionist movement seems to be getting more, well, maybe not. You made a good point earlier. You said a lot of people who were used to be traditional pro-life are now seeing abolition, but
Right.
Those who are staunchly pro-life, not abolition, that divide seems to be getting wider, and people tend to be lobbing things at one another. If this was it, if it was okay, the mother issue, this is the only way to get this passed. And I think that's the argument of the pro-life. I'm not making the argument for them. I'm just thinking, like, trying to get in the head of the person who's on the other side. And they say, we're never going to get abortion done away with. We're never going to have this if this is in there. So why make this the issue? If this is if this isn't really, if the issue really is saving babies, and understand, Ben, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just providing a case where someone may ask you this question, and someone says, look, Ben, the issue is, as long as you have that in there about women, we're never going to pass this. So why don't you just take it out? Why don't you just take it? If that's why are you so hung up on this? Not you personally.
Right.
This is I can see someone asking this question, and I'm really curious as to how you would address a person saying that.
Right. Well, again, it's not any kind of weird fascination with criminalizing women specifically. That's never been the point. And you know that, we hear that critique a lot for sure. Any abolitionist who supports, just saying, equal protection, murdering anyone should be illegal for everyone, we'll hear that argument at some point. I would say the reason why it actually matters is, it's not just some weird hang up, is because the actual abortion environment right now is self-managed abortion is the way that most people do it. So the last study I saw from the Guttmacher Institute said 63% of abortions in America are through abortion pills, right? So it's not going to a Planned Parenthood clinic and getting your baby chopped up there. It's going on a website and ordering an abortion pill through the mail, and it shows up at your doorstep a few days later, and you take it and you murder your child in your bathroom, basically. And the reason why it matters is because women are the ones who are overwhelmingly doing that, right? So it's pills don't take themselves, just like guns don't kill people. People kill people. Pills don't take themselves. These pills are not mailing themselves to people's homes and forcing them down pregnant women's throats. It's people who willfully want to murder their baby. They Google, how can I have an abortion? I live in this state. And then they go on a site, they order it, and then they murder their child. So in order to actually stop that, you can't have this massive loophole saying, yeah, there's one specific class of people who can still order these pills and still do this. It also actually protects women who are forced into abortion. So since it's legal for a woman to murder her own child, a husband, a boyfriend can just apply a lot of pressure and say, all right, here's these pills. You really need to take them. You really need to, or I'm going to cut you off, or like you said, kick you out of the house or something like that. But if you actually just apply the same laws that already protect other people from murder to preborn children, soliciting murder is a crime, right? So it's not a crime to make or pressure somebody to do something that's already legal for them to do. It's not a crime for you to really lay on the pressure and say, Ben, you really need to buy this red car. I'm going to unfollow you on X if you don't buy this red car or something like that. That's a silly example, but it currently is not a crime because it's legal for women to do, to tell them or to pressure them, you really should murder your child. But if you do that to a 3-year-old or apply pressure to somebody to kill a 3-year-old, now you're liable to criminal penalties as well. So equal protection is really the only answer. And even beyond the abortion pill, if you look on certain forums and Reddit threads and online websites, they're basically digging back up like pagan concoctions of herbs and things like that people have been using for millennia to murder their children, just kind of behind the scenes. There's always going to be a new method of abortion, but really we're not going to solve it until we just address murder as murder, and abortion is murder. So that's how we should treat it. Yeah, absolutely. And that gets to the heart of the issue. I think what you just said is it murder or is it not? If it's murder, then it has to be treated as murder. If it's, and I do think that is the divide. If it's murder, we have equal protection for the life that's in the womb. And, that term equal protection seems to be thrown out a lot. And can you explain for a moment just when, cause I know what I mean when I say it, but other people may not, when the abolitionist says we want equal protection, what are we referring to? Absolutely. So we're appealing to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the language it uses. So, no state shall deprive its people of the equal protection of the laws, right? So if you're a person in a certain state, you can't be denied your equal protection of the laws that apply to other people just because of some characteristic about you. So that, of course, was written in the context of slavery and abolishing slavery. Just because somebody has black skin doesn't mean you can legally discriminate against them. But in our case, just because somebody is preborn or is really young, so young that they haven't been born yet, we're just saying apply that standard to them because they're human beings. And it's a really simple calculus. So because they're equally valuable, they're just as image bearer of God as you or I. So when Jesus was conceived in the womb of his mother by the Holy Spirit, when John the Baptist was in the womb of Elizabeth, that was Jesus. That was John the Baptist. They didn't become those people once they were born. They were that from conception. You and I, when we're conceived, when we start our lives as human beings, we have the same DNA as an embryo, as the earliest stages of development as we do today. As I'm 25 and you're a bit older.
Quite a bit. I didn't realize you were 25. I
didn't mean it like that.
Wise beyond your years. As I was reading, I didn't expect you to only be 25. Wow.
Sorry. In any case, yes.
And I hope that didn't sound like when I say only 20. I'm so old, I forget sometimes. Just how old I'm getting. So.
In any case, yes, adult people who are fully developed and grown. Yes. Anyway,
it's okay.
Yeah. But in any case, we're just as valuable as we were when we happened to be really small and inside our mother's wombs. So equal protection just says treat all human beings equally under the law. It's even prescribed, inscripted on the Supreme Court building, equal justice under law. So we claim that that's a national value. Our history in many ways has been defined by that battle. And yet we're denying it to millions of babies every single year, 63 million babies since Roe. And that's a massive issue that needs to be corrected.
You just mentioned Roe, and I know you talk about this in the book, but I want to ask you to just talk about it for a moment, because this is, this episode really is about your book, but it's also about the failure of much of the pro-life movement. Pro-life movement would say we had a great win with the striking down of Roe. And I mean, I remember obviously celebrated, many people celebrated it, but has it had the effect of creating less abortion? Has it done the job, or has it just simply moved the goalposts?
Many people are surprised to hear this, but we actually have more abortion post-Roe than we do pre-Roe. Or I should say post-overturn of Roe versus pre-overturn of Roe. So we're back to up to 1 million abortions per year. And before Roe, it was actually less than that. It was under 1 million. So Roe was good, overturning Roe was good. It was an unjust decision. Everybody kind of knows that at this point. Dobbs was not good in the sense that it just kind of kicked the question back to the states. So the Supreme Court could have appealed to the 14th Amendment and said, these are persons who deserve equal protection. But instead they just sort of said, the states, you can, they washed their hands like Pilate, and they said, you vote on who lives and dies. And we've seen that play out. So there's Amendment 4 in Florida. I know that you provided some quotes when I was writing for the Sentinel about Amendment 4, which is really helpful. But there are states now that are voting yay or nay. Are we going to let babies die en masse, have established that as a right in our state constitution? So that condition is created by Dobbs. But really, I think the powerful thing that the overturn of Roe proved is that the pro-life establishment never really intended to abolish abortion. So beforehand, any bill pre-2022, any abolition bill pre-2022, you would have heard, we can't do this because it violates Roe. And that would be the basis on which it was killed a lot of the time. But now Roe's gone, and these bills are still getting killed. There's just different reasons for it now. It's the second victim narrative. It's, we have midterms next year. We're going to lose House seats if we try to abolish abortion this year. And it doesn't matter what kind of state you're in. I saw that excuse come up in Kentucky. Kentucky has 85% of the members of their legislature have an R next to their name. They're Republicans, and they're still making up that excuse. We're gonna lose seats. It's like, you already have a decisive supermajority that's not going to go away anytime soon. What are you so worried about? And it's because, either they don't care about it, they see it as too politically risky, or they themselves are closet pro-choicers, right? So that's a big problem in the Red States too, is secret. We call them rhinos a lot of time in the grassroots world. But Republicans in name only, who don't actually care about conservative principles. They may put, Christian on their campaign website, but they don't fear the Lord. They're there to further their own power.
Yeah. And that's what you just said. The way that it seems, particularly in the last presidential election and in the last few years of political maneuvering, it seems like the conservative Republican red side has distanced itself from even the pro-life movement. Certainly doesn't want anything to do with the abolition movement. But is that how you perceive it as well? That there's sort of just been like, we're not going to fight that battle anymore. It doesn't matter. We're going to move on to something else.
Yeah, certainly. And talking with friends who are from other countries like Canada and the UK, they sort of see the same pattern happening here that happened there, where the main conservative right-wing party distanced themselves from abortion to basically grow their tent and to go along with the leftward shift of society. So I think that kind of is what happened with Trump last year. I mean, he won. We can't undo that. But I think one bad effect, as many good things are happening now with immigration and government reform and all the rest, he objectively did move us to the left on abortion. He shifted the Overton window to the left on that issue, at least at a national stage. So now Republican presidents are going to see the path forward as in order to win the White House as, just sort of kick it back to the states, just like the Supreme Court did. Don't really care about it at the federal level. So I think that's dangerous. And I think you're seeing good movement in the state legislatures toward abolition. But I think in terms of the Republican Party, the establishment Republican Party, the National Republican Party, they don't care about this issue. I don't think they really ever have, but I think that's just becoming more and more clear as time goes on.
The desire of the abolitionists would be to see abortion abolished across the world, around the world, but particularly in America. Would you want there to be a national ban? Obviously, maybe that's a dumb question, because obviously the answer is yes. But you would want to see this at the federal level, not the state level, I guess is the question I'm asking.
Yeah, certainly. Yes. So I think just like most other murders, I think the states should handle them. If I'm in Pennsylvania, if I murder somebody in Pennsylvania, I'm not going to go to federal prison. Most likely, I'm going to probably go to state prison. I think the states should handle that. I think that's a power that is generally left to the states. But in the absence of that, I have no problem with the federal government saying you can't legally murder people. We're going to hold you accountable for that. Now, I think more practically, Christians have a greater outsized amount of power at the state level, local level, which is why a lot of abolitionists work within their own states or within state legislatures, just because objectively you can do more as a citizen that way. But there are some groups like Abolitionist Rising has been focusing more and more on this, on calling the national government, the federal government, to do more to oppose abortion and to abolish abortion federally, which I completely agree with.
I have two areas I want to cover, and we're gonna divide them up for the rest of our conversation. We're at the 40-minute mark, probably go for about an hour, but I have two areas I want to cover with you that I think would be very useful for the listener. One, I want to talk about a few biblical questions, and I want to ask you how you deal with this at the level of immediate, because you're there every Saturday, you're dealing with this, and I'm sure you have people throw Bible things out at you. I'm sure you have people throw biblical questions out there. And then I want to ask you about have you ever heard the term Smashmouth incrementalism?
Yes.
Okay. Are you okay to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah, happy to.
Because I'm only recently familiar with that term, and I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on that. Where can the pro-life and the abolitionists agree? Maybe is that the question I want to ask, and what are some things we would agree on?
Hi, my name's Justin Johnson.
And I'm Josiah Stowe.
And we are Dominion Wealth Strategists. We are created to put money in the hands of those that are sitting in the pews.
From budgeting to estate planning, savings accounts, retirement planning, life insurance, and a heck of a lot more here at Dominion.
That means that you are leaving an inheritance that passes multiple generations, because that is the legacy. It's part of our mission.
All of Christ for all of life.
And all of finance for Christendom.
What's wrong, son?
I'm too small to play with the big boys.
I have just the thing.
Wow, squirrely chews!
Oh yeah! Let's play some ball! Wow! Let's play some ball! Wow! Let's play some ball!
No! What if your family's financial strategy was built on more than just numbers? What if it was built on Scripture? At Private Family Banking, we believe managing wealth is more than just good planning. It's a God-given privilege and responsibility. In Genesis and Deuteronomy, and all the way into the New Testament, God calls us to be fruitful, wise, and faithful with what He provides. We help Christian individuals, families, and small businesses grow, protect, and pass on wealth anchored in timeless biblical principles to the glory of God in the advancement of His kingdom. Schedule your free discovery call today at liberationeconomy.com.
When we talk about the Bible, now I know as as a Bible teacher and pastor, I know how I would answer these questions, but you're in the trenches, and you're right there with people having these conversations. Do you have people who tell you the Bible doesn't say abortion's wrong? The Bible tells us that life begins at the first breath. And so the baby in the womb is not really a person. Have you heard that? And do you even try to respond when people make that argument?
Yeah, I hear that all the time. It's obviously false. I mean, there's a lot of explicit texts you can point to. You can point to the case law in Exodus about when two men are striving and there's harm and that sort of thing. There is case law that I believe God gives us about abortion. And when Calvin's writing about that chapter, for example, and there's kind of a debate if Moses is just talking about the two men and the women or the babies in the wombs. And Calvin just kind of says, well, of course it's the baby in the womb. We know the heart of God on this. And that's really the pattern of Christianity for the past 2,000 years. There's been a lot of areas to debate. We just had, the day we're recording this, we had a new Pope, right? Pope Leo XIV. There's a lot of different debates between Protestants and Catholics and any issue you can find, baptism, transubstantiation, East versus West. One issue where the Christian church has been pretty much unanimous has been child sacrifice, abortion. And there's a reason why everywhere Christians go in the world, those practices get overturned, is because we serve the author of life. We serve the God who creates us in his own image from conception and to natural death, to your point about euthanasia. And Christians respect that, and we love our neighbors. So we go and we honor God by establishing justice in our various countries and contexts and all the rest to make sure that's respected. So you can point to an infinite number of examples in the Bible, even by necessary implication, like we talked about Jesus and John the Baptist. John the Baptist leapt in the womb when he heard the voice of Mary and Jesus approaching him. And it's because John the Baptist was John the Baptist from the womb. He had his same mission that he would have his entire life, just like Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So our lives start not at birth, but at conception. And I think a lot of people on the streets know that, and they realize that intuitively, but they're suppressing the truth and the righteousness, and they kind of point to what they see as a lack of an explicit biblical text about that issue, and they try to make it a gotcha, like life starts at first breath. And it's patently foolish. It's really a tactic to weaponize our own faith against us. They don't care what the Bible says. They care that you care what the Bible says, so they're going to try to weaponize that against you.
Yeah. There are those who would also say, well, that certainly the Bible tells us it's wrong, but where do we, we're a secular nation, not a Christian nation. And again, I'm throwing this out. I'm not arguing for it. They would say, why do we have to get our, and again, I'm literally teaching a biblical law and ethics class. So I know what my answer is, but I want to hear, I'm sure people want to hear what you have to say. If somebody were to say, well, I'm an atheist, or I'm a Jewish person, or I'm a Muslim, I don't care what your New Testament says. I don't care what Jesus says. What's our answer? What's your answer?
Yeah. Well, the same Jesus who said in Matthew 28 that all authority on heaven and earth has been given to him is the same Jesus in Psalm 2 who rules the nations with a rod of iron. He's the same Jesus of Psalm 110 who receives the nation as his inheritance. So I might have reversed those. Forgive me. But in any case, there's Jesus is Lord, and that's not a theoretical question. He is currently Lord over every nation by virtue of his death, his resurrection, his ascension, his enthronement. The kingdom of God is not some future reality. He's not, he didn't just merely come and die for sin. He came and he died for sin, but he also bought the nations, and he's going to inherit the nations. That's his reward for his suffering. So that's what the Great Commission is we go out and we teach the nations to obey all that Christ has commanded. And that includes how we treat image bearers of God, how we treat our neighbors, including our littlest, most helpless neighbors in the womb. So there's that level as well, which is the main one. But there's also just the practical reality of we are citizens in a constitutional republic. We can vote, we can run for office, we can knock on doors, we can send emails. Paul, when he was spreading the gospel in Acts, frequently invoked his Roman citizenship in very strategic and interesting ways. He spoke to kings. It seemed like a no-brainer to him to use that for the good of the gospel. And why would we not do the same thing for the good of the church in America and for our preborn neighbors and bring about the rule of faith as best we possibly can by God's blessing, just using our influence as everyday citizens.
Yeah. When I hear you saying these things, I'm going to make an assumption, and I know assumptions are dangerous. Can I assume you have a particular eschatological view that maybe influences this?
Yes. So I don't know if I'm post-millennial. I know you are. You're the king of the post-millennials. That's
I'm the king of amillennialism.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I was going to say I'm an optimistic amillennial. So I don't know if I can go as far as post-millennial. That's another issue like baptism I haven't thoroughly dived into, but I think it's open and shut case from Scripture that we should be optimistic about our future. That Christ is going to rule and reign, and He's going to actually be successful in history. So yes, I'm there with you. I'm probably in your camp. Yes.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of people hear me talk, and they will say they think I'm post-mill because I do have such an optimistic view of the gospel. I'm on mill, and I understand I have some distinctions. That's not what we're talking about today as to why I wouldn't be, but I do see a lot of the people that are in this camp of saying abortion should be abolished, it should be abolished legally, a lot of times fall into the category of either amill or post-mill, particularly post-mill, because, but again, that's not to write off any pre-mill or dispensational pre-mill who feel the same way, but it's just funny the things that tend to be associated with our movements. Jeff Durbin, obviously post-mill, obviously theonomic post-mill,
right,
and featured in your book. His emphasis on participation in the public square is influenced by his eschatological view. I don't think he would deny that. In fact, I've heard him say pretty much just that. So what we think about the Bible certainly does affect what we think about how we engage with these things. So now let's move to the other thing I wanted to bring up, and this was the issue of incrementalism, because I do have an internal sympathy, and this is where you and I could dive in a little deeper. I have an internal sympathy for those who say, I can't stop all abortion today, but I want to stop as much as I can today. Right? That's the couple months ago, Doug Wilson was in a discussion. I don't remember if it was a formal debate, but it was a discussion with a person who was a abolitionist. And in that conversation, I thought Doug made a good point. He said, if today I could stop all abortion east of the Mississippi, right? Like if I could make a decree that stopped all abortion east of the Mississippi, but it didn't stop all abortion west of the Mississippi, I would still do that because it would save all the babies east of the Mississippi. I'm sympathetic to that argument, even if I may have some differences as to how that works out. And I think that's what the incrementalist is thinking. I think that's what the mindset of the incrementalist is. And so I wanted to ask you, one, to define Smashmouth incrementalism, and two, what your thoughts of it are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you. There's a way to sympathize with that argument. I happen to disagree with it, but I'm good friends with a lot of Smashmouth guys who would describe themselves like that. And I think they're coming from the right place and saying that I want to save babies. And I would describe myself before I started adopting abolitionism and agreeing with abolitionist principles. I would have described myself as a run all the plays kind of guy. So, if you can pass a bill to abolish abortion, you should do that. But, if you have the chance to sign a heartbeat bill, you should do that too. But what I found in really focusing on the issue and learning about it and getting involved in the process is a lot of those incremental wins are not actually wins. They're more Pyrrhic victories in the sense that they're given to placate and to soften what we're actually asking them to do. So a lot of the times, and I think I pointed this on the book in some states, there'll be an abolition bill that they kill, and then they put forward some meaningless pro-life gesture basically to placate people. So let's say they kill an abolition bill, equal protection bill, and then they pass like a heartbeat bill with all these exceptions. I think South Carolina was like this, where there's all these exceptions worked in for rape and incest, and you can kill them up to 12 weeks. And it seems like it's a good win, but in the context of the actual political context, it was actually a replacement for what they actually should have done. So I think when Doug Wilson says something like that, like East Mississippi versus West, it sounds really good in theory. But when you actually get onto the ground and you see the players at hand and who you're actually up against, a lot of times it's pro-life people who know they can just pass some meaningless bill and they can fundraise off it. They can come back the next year and do even more, useless stuff that falls way short of abolishing abortion, even though they had the chance to do that. There's a lot of bills like that. There's dismemberment bills are a good example where, oh, great, we save babies from dismemberment. But, Mike Johnson's 2015 dismemberment bill in Louisiana, when he was a state rep, it actually spells out all the ways you can kill a baby. It says this is not to say, you can't vacuum them out of the womb. And it lists the ways that you're legally allowed to murder a baby. Or there's bills that say just give the baby a proper burial when they die. So imagine that with a born person, a serial killer murders somebody and they say, just go ahead and make sure you bury them properly and then you're good to go. That's patently absurd. It's unjust. It's foolish. There's even things like pro-life license plates. You can have, a pro-life slogan on your official state license plate, and they'll fundraise off these and they'll throw themselves galas and events, black tie, where they're celebrating each other for passing them. And meanwhile, even in deep red states, abortion just continues year after year. So I think you just have to be really careful with those half measures. And I think if you look at scripture, when Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go, Pharaoh came to him and said, okay, but you can go worship for 3 days in the wilderness, but just take the men. And then the thing that happened was when Pharaoh came back and said, not a hoof shall remain in Egypt, when he kept coming back in faith, expecting God to work on his behalf and saying, we're taking all of it. Pharaoh started to move. Those compromises started to get less and less looking like compromises. At some points even said, you can go. And then he changed his mind. So that persistent call for justice and righteousness in alignment with God's standard actually had an effect on Pharaoh, on the ruler. So we expect the same thing to happen with abolition. And we're seeing it happen. We haven't had a bill passed specifically in the past 10 years, but every single time we come back, we have more sponsors. We have more opportunities for hearings. We have more floor votes. With Foundation to Abolish Abortion, we had over a dozen bills this year. And in pretty much every single one of those states, we had, 10 sponsors, 20 sponsors, whereas 5 years ago, it'd be like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 really bold guys that would sponsor it. And now it's becoming more of an expectation because the standard isn't being compromised on in favor of half measures. So that'll be my response to the Smashmouth. I think it's a good intention, but we should obey God. God says don't legislate iniquity, don't codify iniquity. There are explicit biblical texts to talk about that. And just on the ground, practically, we're seeing really good fruit from just not compromising from this standard. Let other people, like Dustin Deaver said this in the intro to my book. I know I'm going long here, but
no, please.
Yeah, he said, let others make the compromise, right? So if anybody's going to compromise, let it be other people. If they're going to write their heartbeat bill, don't let it be on your conscience. Don't let it be on your accounts that you compromise on child sacrifice. Let other men do that and then come back the next year and keep calling for full abolition.
I have to ask this question, and this is because you've said it a couple times, I said it a couple times, but what do they mean when they say Smashmouth versus just normal incrementalism? Does it just mean more aggressive?
Yeah, I'd say a big feature of Smashmouth is they're willing to support equal protection, at least in principle, whereas a lot of people who say pro-life wouldn't necessarily do that, especially if you're working at an establishment organization. I actually don't know specifically what the term Smashmouth means, but I associate it with run all the plays, like just do everything you can to end abortion, do whatever is politically prudent or pragmatic even. That's what I associate that with. And again, the problem there is, what is sold to you as prudence and pragmatism and cunning may just be a trap that is laid for you by the establishment to not actually get anything done.
Gotcha. I have one final question, and this is just more of a kind of experiential question, because you have been you've experienced the political side, you've written the book. One of the things you said in the book is that, we reached out to this person for comment, no comment. We reached out to this person for comment. Like that was like a constant refrain in the book, was like, we asked these people to say something and they did not want to say anything. But one of the complaints that I have heard from the pro-life side, because again, I do have friends and I've been around a lot of people, talked around a lot of different people. One of the complaints I've heard from the pro-life side is that the abolitionist side are hard to get along with. That they're difficult because it's an all or nothing strategy. Therefore, there is never an opportunity where there's going to be any attempt to find any common ground. It's either you agree with me or you're a devil. And what are your thoughts about that? And is that, do you think that's are there jerks out there, I guess, and I'm not asking you to name names, but who have maybe harmed the abolitionist side with their behavior?
I certainly say so. Yes. So it's just basic Christian character is, not slandering people and trying your best to work with people who don't agree with you. So like, a Smashmouth people would be a good example is, instead of just calling them the devil on social media, just have a debate with them, sit down with them. And I think guys are doing that to their credit. But we have to resist that temptation of, I would contend most certainly that abolitionism is biblical. It's the biblical approach to abolishing abortion. But just because another Christian doesn't agree with it yet, doesn't mean they never will. Doesn't mean they can't be persuaded. That's the case on a lot of issues in baptism, eschatology, some of the things we mentioned so far. Just basic Christian charity is important. And yes, it's urgent, of course, because it's child sacrifice and there's babies dying. But really, when it comes down to it, I'm willing to work with people who want to abolish abortion, even if they call themselves Smashmouth. So in Texas a few weeks ago, we had a bill that was supposed to have a hearing, but the chairman of that hearing, that committee happened to pull a bill. But there were Smashmouth guys who would have called themselves Smashmouth with us lobbying for that legislation. And we didn't talk at all about, the differences between abolition and Smashmouth. We were there to actually accomplish something. I think as long as people are willing to do that, and it may not be I support everything they ever do or every bill they ever run, but I think there is room for common ground and charity. And we can have those discussions, but it doesn't really do abolitionists any favors merely to just double down and to, really just like do a whisper campaigns behind the scenes. And I spoke at a conference last year in Florida in October about Amendment 4. And I had people accusing me of being a compromiser because the group I was speaking with still used the term pro-life alongside abolition. And I don't do that, but I wanted to go speak at the conference and help them knock doors and that sort of thing. And I didn't, sometimes it has to be like Tobias and Sambalot, where you say, I'm trying to get something done. You need to go away and let me work here. But I think just basic Christian charity and character helps and goes a long way.
Yeah. And I think what you just said makes a huge point that I think a lot of people do need to hear. And that is, if this is a serious issue. Children are dying. Obviously, this is not a game. It's not, nobody's doing this for fun. This is very serious. But at the same time, we can harm our witness and our mission if we are aggressively anti-socially difficult to get along with it. If we attack people rather than the issue, I think this is all just basic Christianity, as you said. Just let your Christian character be demonstrated by how you behave towards others. I think is a very big part of it. Well, Ben, I want to thank you again for being with me today and talking about your book. And I do hope that this will point people to it. I know I'm going to encourage the class to read it and to learn more about the history of the abortion abolitionist movement. And if you could, for just one last minute, tell them again when the book's coming out, how to get it, and the discount code and everything if they want to pre-order all those things as we draw to a close.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to discuss this. I'm glad that you cut out the time to do it. So it's Forsakers of the Fatherless, and you can find it on the Founders Ministries websites. If you use the code FOSKY, you can get 10% off your order. And again, if you want to do a bulk order, a bulk order, you can get discounts as well for that. And if you're a church or a pastor, you can contact Founders directly for even more generous discounts on that book. So thank you again, Keith, for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you, Ben, for being on the show with me today. And I want to thank you guys for watching the show. Again, if you are enjoying the content, please remember one of the best things that you can do for us is simply subscribing to the channel. And if you like this video specifically, hit the thumbs up button. And if you didn't, hit the thumbs down button twice. All right, guys, thank you for watching Your Calvinist Podcast. My name is Keith Foskey, and I've been your Calvinist. May God bless you.
Sometimes I feel the weight of the world fall down on me, And I need a friendly voice with some good theology. So I mix a manly drink, then I hit the YouTube link, and I feel my troubles all melt away. Oh, it's Your Calvinist Podcast with Keith Forsakers. Beards and bow ties, laughs till sunrise. It's Your Calvinist Podcast with Keith Forsakers. He's not like most Calvinists, he's nice.
Your Calvinist Podcast with Keith Forsakers, striving for superior theology and denominational unity, one joke at a time.